Denver.
Very, very active, making an awful lot of noise.
Yes, in a pigmentation.
You just saw a light
Yes,
where?
sir.
Wait, no, slow down. Where?
Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flashlight there, sir. There it is.
Hey, I see it too. What is it?
We don't know, sir.
So, can I get some? Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Looks to be out maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. I'm going to switch off it. The light is gone now. It was approximately 120 degrees from the site.
Again.
Is it back again?
Yes, sir.
Oh, that's the flashlight set. Let's move out to the edge of the clearing so we can get a better look at it. See if you can get the star scope on it. The light's still there, and all the barnyard animals have gotten quiet now. Yeah, we're heading about 110 to 120 degrees from the site out through to the clearing now. Still getting a reading on the meter. Got 2 clicks. Meter count 3 or 4 clicks, getting stronger.
June 26, 1970. The US Hornet is decommissioned, turned now into a museum piece in Alameda, California. The Hornet was a titan of an aircraft carrier, surviving 27 plus years on the sea and 2 decommissions. Needless to say, she saw a lot of action. The Hornet originally set out in 1944, where she took part in attacks on Japanese installations, took part in the Mariana and Palau Island campaign, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Philippines campaign, the Volcano and the Ryukyu Islands campaign, where she took heavy damage, and years later became pivotal in not only the Korean War, Operation Magic Carpet, Vietnam, and many military quagmires, but she also was instrumental in recovery of the Apollo 11 and 12 astronauts when they returned to Earth. She was later decommissioned in 1970. With a history like that, she's bound to have some stories about her, and while she sits being remembered now as a great military boat, she also now harbours a second title, the Grey Ghost, one of America's most haunted ships. These stories and tales range from sounds heard on the ship to ghostly figures to straight up paranormal encounters witnessed by staff and museum visitors. Regular occurrences, according to guests who have stayed on the ship overnight, a feature the museum allows for a fee, are sounds of gunshots, walking across the floor when no people are outside, fans and lighting flickering or turning on and off randomly, and a recurrent sighting of the white dress ghost. Bob Ice from the Caltech forum for the USS Hornet wrote about their experience with the apparition. Quote, "In early February 2009, I was volunteering on the USS Hornet with a group of my fellow US Coast Guardsmen. We were painting a compartment, and a few of us were wearing white Tyvek paper suits. When our paint started running low, I went off in search of the Hornet worker that was supplying our paint, getting lost in the process. As I wandered the passageways, I came off a side passage onto the starboard main passageway, one deck below the hangar deck. I saw what I thought was one of my co-workers stepping off the main hall onto a side passage about 25 feet away from me. I called out to him, but he kept walking, and when I got to the hall he stepped into, there was a chain blocking the entrance, and it was a completely empty compartment. Needless to say, I was confused, but kept walking and eventually found my way back to the room where we were painting. When I saw the co-worker I thought I had seen earlier, I mentioned to him that I had called him in the passageway, but he told me that he hadn't left the room for about an hour. Later, when I mentioned this to the Hornet employees, one lady said that I had seen the dress white ghost, apparently an apparition of a sailor wearing a dress white uniform. Similarly, an anonymous user posted their experience of their time as a cadet in 2005, quote, "It was the 2005 Fleet Week in San Francisco, and our Sea Cadet unit attended it. It was my first time that I attended Fleet Week, and I was really excited when someone told me that we'd be spending the night aboard a retired aircraft carrier, the USS Hornet. When I got aboard, all seemed normal until the night came, and the word started going around that the ship was haunted. I have a very strong belief and fear of ghosts, so I believed it. Worse off, all of us had to participate in a fire and security watch for our individual units. Mine got called at 3 in the morning, so I switched into my work utilities and made my way from the marine racks to the CPO mess area. It had to be the scariest thing I've ever done. When I got down there, the other unit watch standers were waiting for us. I remember hearing cries for help and I immediately alerted security thinking we had a medical situation with a cadet. But strangely, we were the only ones who heard it. And after checking the 2 rack sections near us, we did not find a source of the cry. About an hour later, there was a distinctive smell of pipe or cigar smoke, and we did not know where it came from. We radioed security to see if anyone had been smoking on the decks above us, but they said someone was smoking a cigarette on the fantail, and we were 2 decks down. That was really weird. The strangest was the sound of footsteps near the head on the deck above us. We thought someone had gotten out of their rack without permission and gone to the head without alerting us, so when we went up and checked, but no one. The rest of the night I could not sleep because I kept hearing voices near my rack. I was relieved that we only stayed there a night. I don't think I could have survived 2. I believe it's fair to be skeptical about some of the stories you read on the USS Hornet. She is, after all, an old ship that dished out and witnessed hundreds to thousands of deaths. So it's understandable that some of these events could chalk it up to being a very old vessel. There are, however, a lot of stories from a variety of military men, staff and pedestrians alike that all speak of similar yet somehow still personal experiences. Regardless of whether you believe in the paranormal or not, a lot of people have lost their lives aboard the Hornet, so maybe it's not too crazy to believe that there are still spirits that live on this ship. Jump forward 10 years after the Hornet's decommissioning. Back on land in good old England, a group of US Air Force personnel stationed at RAF bases experienced something otherworldly in a local forest. For those outside of the motherland, this is Suffolk, more specifically Rendlesham Forest, a now renowned UFO and paranormal hotspot thanks to the events of the 1980s, specifically the 26th to the 28th of December. 2 British RAF bases, Ben Waters and Woodbridge, under the operation of the US Air Force during the Cold War, were made home to UFO encounters. The first sighting came on the night of December 26th at 3 AM. A security patrol near the eastern gate of Woodbridge saw strange coloured lights that descended into the forest. 3 men, Jim Penniston, John Burroughs, and Edward Cabansag, all investigated these lights on foot. They reported seeing a glowing metallic object with coloured lights. Jim said that he touched the object, which he called a craft, and said it was warm and covered in hieroglyphic-like symbols. An hour later, the local police were called, but the officers who arrived found nothing but the lights from the Orford Ness lighthouse a few miles away from the coast. At daybreak, some of the servicemen returned to the eastern edge of the forest to find small impressions on the ground, as well as some burn marks. The police then again showed up and blamed it on animals. While unfortunately that's all the details we have on the night of December 26th, the story still continues with Jim Penniston. In an interview in 2010, Jim described that touching the aircraft initiated a sort of download of information when touching the supposed hieroglyphic-like sketchings. He also went into further detail about the night as stated by the Rendlesham forums. Cabansag watched the mysterious pulsating multicoloured lights in forest, while his 2 team members headed out on foot. As Penniston and Burroughs approached the unusual lights, they noticed abnormal sensations on their hair, skin and clothing. It seemed as though the air was electrically charged. Also, a time distortion occurred. According to the men, time seemed as though it slowed, and it was difficult to move. Another odd characteristic was everything was void of sound. Now visible, the craft was sitting silently at the bottom of a berm on the pine forest floor. Penniston cautiously approached the non-aerodynamic, triangular, black, glassy craft. It was like nothing he had ever witnessed before or since. The craft had patterns of blue, yellow, and red colours running through the surface as though part of the craft. It was very difficult to put into words what he was witnessing. His up-close investigation of the craft included photographs, measurements, and drawings, which he recorded into his USAF-issued notebook. He took special note of the strange pictorial-type markings on the side of the craft. When Sergeant Penniston put his hand on the etched symbols, which felt like sandpaper compared to the rest of the smooth moulded surface, everything became a brilliant bright white. He could neither see nor hear. He was alone in a brilliant bright white light. This occurred for an undetermined amount of time. Then his sight returned. He was standing next to the craft, facing the pictorial glyphs. The craft started to turn a vivid bright white colour, so bright in fact Sergeant Penniston thought it was going to explode. He took a defensive position nearby as the craft was engulfed in the light. The craft then lifted off at approximately 4 feet from the ground, manoeuvred between the trees, ascended to treetop level, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The following day, back in his room, Jim was seeing ones and zeros in his mind's eye. Troubled by the revolving flashing images of ones and zeros he received from touching the glyphs, he felt compelled to write them down in a notebook. Jim records the ones and zeros in his notebook. Upon completing the transfer to notebook paper, the image in his mind disappears. Jim puts the notebook away with his belongings and doesn't think too much about it again until the year 2010. In 2010, during a casual conversation with a researcher, he mentions the codes and displays the notebook. The researcher recognizes immediately the ones and zeros as binary code and sets out to help Jim decipher it. Now, there are many pictures of these recorded binary codes, all ones and zeros like you would expect, but they have been decoded to say very cryptic things. For example, exploration of humanity 6668100, and continuous for planetary advan, followed by coordinates that lead to various places around the UK. Finally, Jim would also personally say that, "I wanted it to go away. I had no need to talk to it about it either." For this was not to be the case, for I was methodically and consistently interviewed and interrogated by my chain of command and other agencies. Every time I was promised that was the last interview, and it would be absorbed into the classified annals of data, and I would need not to talk or tell any more about it. This was not the case. I went for at least 14 debriefings and 2 by non-air personnel. I gave all information from memory, and at no time was the textbook ever brought up. The debriefs were all for the last time. I was promised to tell all and to tell it correctly, and it would be the last of questions at Rendlesham. For these were to continue no matter what I had said. I do believe the command element were more for obtaining knowledge, but the external interrogation were for much more, I'm afraid. There are many interviews and podcasts of Jim going into further detail about that night and the events afterwards, but the apex of his experience is these codes he so-called received from symbols. Back in the 80s though, 2 days later on the 28th, one Charles Hout, deputy base commander, led a small team into the forest in the morning to take radiation readings around the reported area. The readings were mostly normal background levels, but spiked slightly over half a mile away. What's real cool is that Holt decided and recorded this all on a cassette, which I actually have for your listening pleasure. I'm not going to play it all because it's 18 minutes long, but most of it is just Holt and his crew exploring the radiation readings around trees. I will leave the full cassette in a bio, but bizarrely though, at around the 14:30 mark, Holt and his crew begin talking about a strange red flashing light. He tells his men to turn off the lights and say how they're definitely coming towards them around 200 to 300 yards away. He describes it as an eye winking and changes from 2 lights to 5 lights. As mentioned before, the lighthouse was visible in the distance, but it was clearly more east this time, and away from the lights in front of them. Holt in his memo later describes 3 star-like lights in the sky above the horizon. He said they were the brightest and hovered around them for 3 hours, occasionally beaming down a stream of light here and there.
Looks like some of them came off about 15 to 20 feet up. Some small branches about an inch or less in diameter. 0148, we're hearing very strange sounds out of the farmer's barnyard animals. They're just very, very active, making an awful lot of noise.
Yes, in a pigmentation.
You just saw a light where? Wait, no, slow down. Where?
Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flashlight there, sir. There it is.
Hey, I see it too. What is it?
We don't know, sir.
So, can I get some? Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Looks to be out maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. I'm going to switch off it. The light is gone now. It was approximately 120 degrees from the site.
Again.
Is it back again?
Yes, sir.
Oh, that's the flashlight set. Let's move out to the edge of the clearing so we can get a better look at it. See if you can get the star scope on it. The light's still there, and all the barnyard animals have gotten quiet now. Yeah, we're heading about 110 to 120 degrees from the site out through to the clearing now. Still getting a reading on the meter. About 2 clicks. Maybe 3 or 4 clicks, getting stronger.
The Rendlesham Forest incident ends there, unfortunately. There is no more information. However, the area has always been and remains a hotspot. Back in 1956, in Lankheath Bentwaters, similar to Rendlesham, a group of RAF and USAF soldiers were monitoring radar signals in the base on the 13th of August 1956. The night sky was clear and completely normal aside from an ongoing meteor shower named Perseid. At around 21:30, radar technicians tracked an unidentified aircraft first appearing as a normal aircraft coming from the sea and apparently several thousand miles per hour. They also tracked a larger group of objects moving slower than northeast, which then merged into one large craft before moving north. Even more targets were detected from the east to the west. A T-33 subsonic jet trainer was directed to investigate these contacts, to which they reported nothing unusual. No visual crafts, no objects, nothing. One pilot did spot Mars in the sky, though. An hour later, another target was detected approaching the base at 2,000 to 4,000 miles per hour. It faded as soon as it passed over the base and then it reappeared to the west. What makes this a bizarre story, though, is that a few groundmen said they saw a white light moving rapidly as the radar went off. Similarly, a pilot in the sky in a C-47 also testified to seeing an object move past them. This was no longer just a radar error. Bentwaters called and alerted RAF Lakenheath 40 miles northwest of them to look out for the targets, to which ground personnel at Lakenheath confirmed multiple sightings of several luminous objects, of which arrived, made a sharp turn, and then apparently merged before moving off. An aircraft in the sky made contact, engaged in a sort of pursuit with a craft, but was called back to the base because of engine problems. There are, like in all UFO sightings, contradictions in parts of people's testimonies, logical explanations, and sound reasoning. A popular excuse is that meteor showers was to blame, or that the radar simply was experiencing a form of anomalous propagation, radars behaving weird because of atmospheric disturbance. These stories and tales don't stop there, though. Rendlesham, Bentwaters, and Lakenheath are home to so many alien and UFO stories that I can't describe them all here. Regardless, radar interference or visitation from another life form, either way, it's hard to deny what happened those nights was pretty bizarre, to say the least. This next story, I'm awarding the title of Charlie's Technical Entry. This title is being given as it doesn't technically involve the military and thus breaks the rule of the video. However, it's both too niche to make a video of it on its own, and I doubt it will make another paranormal video anytime soon. Plus, it has a military chinook, so I'm placing my comically large lock on this one and calling it my technical entry. This is Betty Cash and Vicky Landrum, 51 and 57 years old respectively. Betty was a restaurant manager who led a fairly normal life. Vicky also led a normal life, however later would be described as a born-again Christian. That's important, remember that. On the night of December 29th, after having dinner together, the two began driving back to their home in Dayton, Texas. If you want an unnecessary autistic car fact, they were driving in an Oldsmobile Cutlass, a line of cars created by the General Motors Oldsmobile division between 1961 and 1999. Also in the car was Vicky's 7-year-old grandson, Colby Landrum. Based on their later account, it got to around 9 p.m, where when driving on a 2-lane road in a very dense woods, the pair saw a light above the trees, to which they naturally assumed to be an aeroplane heading for Houston Intercontinental Airport, which, to their credit, was only around 56 kilometers from their location that night, and as such they paid it little mind. Some more minutes of driving later, and they believed to have seen the same light they saw previously, but somehow brighter and closer. It is said to have come from a huge diamond-shaped object that was hovering above the treetops. Underneath the object was allegedly a large flame that emitted massive amounts of heat. Vicky, as mentioned earlier, as being a born-again Christian, told Betty to stop the car. She believed not only that they'd burn if they got close, but that the object was a sign of the second coming of Jesus Christ. She believed this to the extent that she told her grandson that, "That's Jesus, he will not hurt us." It's not for me to judge one's religious beliefs, but I'm not entirely sure how she came to the conclusion that this was the second coming of Jesus. I mean, just looking at it, there's a bit of difference in anatomy. Betty said she was scared and considered going back the way they came, but this was made impossible because of how narrow the road was. She feared any attempt to turn around would result in the car getting stuck on the dirt shoulders, which were softened by the rain that evening. With no other choice, the two got out the car to examine the object closer. However, Vicky returned to the car when her grandson was visibly terrified. Betty, however, remained outside on her own, staring at the object. She said that the heat was so strong that it made the car's body hard to touch, if not impossible without burns. When Betty returned to the car and used her coat to grip the door handle, she touched the dashboard vinyl, which had left an imprint that was still there weeks later and would become paramount evidence in their case later. A while later, the object began ascending over the trees and gradually rose higher in the sky. A group of helicopters allegedly surrounded it in a tight military-esque formation. The two counted up to 23 helicopters, give or take, and identified them as Boeing CH-47 Chinooks. The colour of these choppers was never identified, however Betty claimed that they had the United States Air Force markings on them. The group of UFO and helicopter escort of sorts gradually moved into the distance, allowing the car to move safely along. Betty managed to be able to see the objects move off and watched as they drove away. The whole encounter was said to have lasted around 20 minutes, which is paramount to what each of the trio said. While unfortunately there isn't anything concrete or at least as detailed as Becky and Vicky's account, many other residents did say they saw something similar in the distance to their houses. A few calls were made to the Huffman and Dayton areas to the local police, and a giant fiery object and helicopters have been reported at the same time as the Cash-Landrum report. Later investigators would also hunt down and take into account the testimonies of these civilians, but they all pretty much said the same thing. A large diamond shooting fire and hovering with helicopters around it, and not much else came from these accounts. After driving off and making out of the woods, Betty took Vicky to her grandson's home. Weirdly enough, the three all suffered through the night with nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, weakness, and burning in the eyes. Over the next few days, Betty's symptoms worsened, with large blisters forming on her skin. Betty was taken to hospital on January 3rd after it got to the point she couldn't walk anymore. She had lost large patches of skin and hair. She was released 12 days later, even though her condition had not improved much. She then later returned to hospital not long after and stayed for a further 15 days. It was in this time that she claimed the doctors stopped treating her for originally suspected burns and switched to radiation sickness after believing she had been exposed to radiation. Later after this, she was then treated for breast cancer 2 years later. The Landrums were not doing much better either. Vicky had begun developing a cataract in one of her eyes. See, the problem with these accounts is that while these symptoms are similar to those who have been exposed to ionizing radiation, the speed of which these symptoms occurred was abnormally quick, and was only consistent with that of a massive dose of radiation that would, in any normal person, kill them in just a few days. But considering all three of the victims lived for years later, it begs to question what the three received that night. Some theorize that it was a sort of chemical combination driven by aerosol delivery. Actual medical record also conflict with this theory too. Betty's records at the hospital say that she was hospitalized from January 2nd to the 19th with little, if any, hair loss upon admission. This did, however, show up weeks later. Her dermatology consultant also diagnosed only cellulitis, or swelling of the scalp and face, with zero mention of skin loss whatsoever. Whether this be from administrative neglect or fact, Cash's account doesn't link up with actual medical records, adding even more mystery and skepticism to the story. Adding even more skepticism to the story, the three were interviewed at the Bergstrom Air Force Base 8 months later. During said interview, the two were asked to draw the object they saw, and did so with the iconic diamond shape and fire from below. However, where the discrepancy comes into it is, they were also interviewed 34 days later after the account. And Betty had stated then that they could not get close enough and that the lights were too bright to see anything. Vicky also said she couldn't see anything, however it was only her grandson who, quote, swore it looked like a big diamond. After some time, Becky and Vicky contacted their US senators, Lloyd Benston and John Tower, who advised them to file a complaint with the Judge Advocate Claims Office at Bergstrom Air Force Base, the reason for their 1981 interview. The representatives at the base recommended that they seek a lawyer and find financial compensation for their injuries. Peter Gersten took the case pro bono, or without payment, but the case found its way to the US courts for many years. The two sued the US government for $20 million. Of course, the US military, being the US military, denied absolutely every claim that any UFO operation or helicopters took flight that night, and thus, because there was no other evidence that the two could provide, the case was swiftly dismissed in 1986. This UFO account has become one of the most important and influential encounters ever told, and while Becky and Vicky did not get any financial compensation for their health problems, the now named Cash-Landrum incident went down in history as one of the landmark UFO encounters. Betty Cash, unfortunately, passed away 18 years to the day of the encounter in 1998, aged 69. Vicky would later pass on, aged 82, on September 12, 2007. Her grandson Colby is said to still be alive, but he is kept out of much of the public's grasp and kept to himself with his own family. Hello. Before we get on to the next topic, I just want to break the video down a little bit and let you know what's going on. In my previous video, the previous video was actually Dystopicon, which you've probably seen now has been taken down. I don't really have an excuse. It's simply because I just didn't like the way the video came out. I may remaster it in the future. I don't know, I can't say, but for right now, it's been taken down. I want to preface that the next video was meant to be after Professor Layton 3. It was meant to be a game called Garage Bad Dream Adventure. That is still very much in the pipeline. It is my next main video. That is going to be a good 5 hours long. So it's taken a long time. It's also going through script rewrites. I'm re-recording everything because I didn't like the way the script came out. Audio has been lost. A lot of things have gone wrong, which has delayed the project even further. So basically, I'm starting from scratch. That brings me to this video. I'm gonna be frank, I don't really enjoy making some gaming videos. Well, I mean, the Professor Layton one kind of, because I did it back to back, it kind of took all the fun out of the Professor Layton series. I intend to come back to it. I do. I want to finish the series, because that would be a massive undertaking. It's not like Resident Evil where I'm going to do 3 videos and then give up. No, I will come back to Professor Layton, but I think my interest in gaming and the demographic for gaming videos has died, or dwindled at the very least. And so I'm putting gaming videos on hold for a while. Instead, I'm going back to my roots. If you have been following the video for a long time, you've probably seen that one of my most successful and earliest videos was true crime. Now, the way that video was set out, I really enjoy making videos like that, and hence why you're watching one now about paranormal military stories. I genuinely enjoy making these sorts of videos, and they're easy enough. I can get them out in a month if I lock in. You know, it's simple things that you can enjoy whilst I make the long-form content. So I think I'm going to do a string of these sorts of videos. Hopefully you can enjoy it. I've taken up enough of this video, yapping about random shit you don't care about. Okay, next story. February 24th, 1942. Within the midst of World War II, California sleeps like every other night. This was, however, a major American city, so fears of retaliation after the Pearl Harbor attacks were still high. Civilians and military alike began being paranoid and angry at the attack, but they also became fearful of another attack, or even a full-scale invasion of America. In some places, this was considered a realistic event rather than paranoid fear. In Alaska, residents were advised to cover their windows and black out all lights or electric, similar to British tactics during the Blitz. There was also rumours of a Japanese attack carrier off the coast of San Francisco Bay, which escalated to Oakland closing schools and ordering a blackout like Alaska. It even got so bad at one point that over 500 military troops were sent to defend Walt Disney Studios in California to protect it and nearby factories from potential enemy air attacks or sabotage. In the months after Pearl Harbor, these fears got worse, especially so aided by the military, who began mobilizing for the war by installing anti-aircraft guns, bunkers, air raid sirens, and many other precautions all over the nation. Perhaps what fueled this fear and hysteria more than anything is that American merchant ships were indeed being attacked by Japanese submarines off the west coast. All of these fears and preparations eventually came to fruition on February 24th, 1942. The Office of Naval Intelligence sent out a warning that an attack on California could be anticipated within the next 10 hours. This, of course, put California into a panic, and everyone prepared according to their precautions training. Later that evening, flares and blinking lights could be seen near defensive plants, and so an alert was called out at 7 o'clock, but was soon lifted at 10 o'clock. This on and off activity kept going through the night until the early hours of February 25th. At 2:25 a.m., air raid sirens rang all throughout Los Angeles. A complete total blackout was ordered and thousands of air raid wardens were stationed at their positions. At 3:16 a.m., the Coast Artillery Brigade started firing a 50 caliber machine gun and 12.8 pound anti-aircraft shells into the air at some reported aircraft. These guns fired over 1,400 shells in that time between 3 and 4 a.m. The all clear was sounded, and the blackout lifted a few hours later at 7 a.m. Many buildings were damaged by shell fragments, but most importantly, 5 civilians died as a result of the fire, 3 in car crashes and 2 of heart attacks. So what gives this seemingly normal war story a place on a paranormal list? Well, that's all because of this image right here. This is one of the most iconic UFO images of all time. Following the end of the war, the Japanese military publicly declared that there was no attack or planes flown over LA during the entire war. Even more bizarre is that the US government wouldn't declare the cause for alarm until 1983, where they blamed it on a meteorological balloon. But looking at this image, does this look like a meteorological balloon? Unfortunately, this image was later found to be touched up or edited or, primitive Photoshop, I suppose, before its publication. But that begs the question of, why was there a meteorological balloon out above LA at 3 o'clock at night? Was it really a Japanese fighter squad, a freak balloon incident, or perhaps something not of this world? As I write and edit these entries, something's occurred to me. You rarely see alien encounters happen in present time. I mean, most of these I've read today have all been pre-2000. Sure, they have significance still, but they all happened between the 1920s to late 1990s. I'm sure there are plenty of encounters today, but most of the significant ones are from a long time ago. This entry is not one of those, however. In fact, I'd consider this small entry to be kind of niche in the sense of it's not hugely known by name. In 1967, at the Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, a group of soldiers and technicians operated in an underground missile complex located between Hilga and Winfred, designated Echo Flight. On March 16th, 10 intercontinental ballistic missiles mysteriously shut down function out of nowhere without warning. Launch officer Robert Salas and his crew were forced to sit and watch as each missile shut offline, almost instantly without warning. This, of course, started a panic. Security guards were sent to patrol the area for any kind of hostile entity, as you'd assume. Many of the said guards actually reported that they saw large glowing red objects hovering in the sky near the launch sites. There isn't much more to the events of that night besides that, and it's unfortunate because that's all we have. However, Robert did say later on that a similar malfunction occurred at another flight location days before this event. Perhaps even more stranger, each crew member, including Robert, was forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement on the event, and were made to be quiet about it for decades. The United States Air Force launched an investigation into the events, but as you'd expect, they brought up no evidence of any sort of UFOs. They stated that the shutdown was simply caused by a technical electrical issue, or in some reports, component failure in the guidance system's logic computers, which is engineering for it bugged out. The official report, however, has not stopped people from believing that this was a targeted attack from non-human intelligence, perhaps to show that they are superior to us in power, or that what we consider our greatest weapons can be turned off at the flick of a button. Another argument is that what the security guards saw on that day was actually Mars instead of a group of UFOs. While normally a small incident like this would have died down, it was Robert Salas that kept the investigation going. He prominently and regularly denies being a crazy UFO enthusiast, but instead wanted to know simply what happened that night. He went on to appear in many press interviews and talk shows, even writing multiple books, and continues to attest that it was simply a mechanical failure. It's hard to say whether his statement about being a UFO believer is still true, or if he's just accepted and profited off the media attention, but what's safe to say is we may never get a definitive answer to what happened that day. That was until last year. Well, kinda. In 2025, the Pentagon reported that the incident had actually been caused by a test of EMPs in the area, but didn't elaborate on it any further. I know this one's kinda short again, but there's unfortunately nothing more to it, and that's all there really is on the Malmstrom incident. A short story, sure, but still one that's strange, especially the NDAs the crew had to sign. Maybe the government is hiding something after all. Who knows? Moving away from aliens and UFOs and going back to ghosts of all things, this is perhaps the most intriguing entry on today's episode, and that's why I've saved it for last. It's my favourite. It's hard to pinpoint one specific story, as everyone has had different experiences when they visited this place. This is Observation Point Rock, a remote military outpost located in Afghanistan. Over the years, it has collected a reputation as being heavily haunted with paranormal activity, phantom noises, and a constant feeling of being watched. The site was originally a Soviet observation post, where the Soviets were then killed by the Mujahideen group. Years later, the US military took over and dug into the mound in order to fortify themselves. However, upon digging, they struck many human bones, pottery shards, and military helmets from various time zones in history, which led to them having the chilling realization that this 100-foot tactical mound was actually one huge ancient unmarked graveyard. As I said before, it's hard to link this place to one story or another, but generally soldiers in the past have told stories of sudden bursts of weapon fire or phantom movement when no allies or enemies were present. There have been reports of ghostly figures, even some that speak Russian near the collapsed trench and tunnel systems. There's also been a sudden chilling drop in temperature, radio static that couldn't be explained, and strange lights that have been picked up through night vision equipment. There are plenty of stories out there, but I want to go over a couple I liked that show a real human side to the story instead of just boring Wikipedia facts. Isolation_ on Reddit writes, and before I read, I want to preface that I am shortening this down a little, as it's a very personal and detailed account, but for the sake of the video length, I'm shortening it. The link will probably be in the bio for all these accounts if you want to read them yourself. I and 3 other men were put out of a little bump in the land, a hill about 65 feet called OP Rock. Before us, the British were there, and they warned us of oppressive atmosphere. Op Rock was approximately 600 meters from patrol base Hassan Abad, where the rest of my unit was. Our job was to watch for any bad guys heading towards the patrol base, engage them, and call in QRF or possibly air support. Op Rock used to have a small cave system under it, most likely dug by the Taliban. That is until the US dropped about 2,500 pounds of explosive freedom onto their heads. If there were any men inside who did not die first from having the air sucked out of their lungs, die a second time from having the concussive force turn their organs into jelly, or die a third time being engulfed in flames, they were buried. So we get up to our little Op Rock on the first day of what was going to be about 3 months of literal hell. First thing you do when you're going to a static at a location, dig. Maybe a trench and dig some more to throw up a few HESCO barriers, and the like. Well, we started digging, and as we were digging we started to find bones. Not one bone, not 2 bones, tons of bones. There were bones for days. We could have built our whole op out of bones. We found relics too, pottery, tinware, a helmet. The helmet was a Soviet issue from the 70s or 80s. These were human bones of Soviet soldiers who never made it home. Our first night, I got third watch, from 12 midnight to 4 in the morning. I had night vision and was just watching out over the landscape. I started to see flashes of light about 400 meters from my position. Looks like incoming small arms fire, but I did not hear any gunfire, nor the distinctive snap of a round going past in close proximity, nor any distinctive tracers. They pop up all over the place, then disappear, then show up again a few minutes later. I wake up one of my butt buddies, and he too notices the flashes. So it was just not my imagination or malfunctioning gear. Great. Eventually some other light showed up in the sky, significantly brighter, and seemed to float to the ground like a really dim flare. Taking off the NVGs, all we could see was dark. Unsettling, to say the least. This happened a few times, not just to me, but to other guys on the hill as well. The worst event at Op Rock, and probably the most terrifying moment I've ever experienced in my life, happened about 3 weeks after we were posted up. I was sitting another late night watch. It had been a few days since anyone had seen any of the strange lights, However, immediately they came on in force. I swear they were muzzle flashes. I saw the dim flares again. It seemed like the entire position was being lit up. At first I ducked for cover, but there was no physical or auditory evidence, just the lights. Then, almost as abruptly as it started, it ended, and I was back to looking at the land through a fuzzy green lens. A whisper in my ear, Broze Uryuzie. I don't know what it meant. I knew it was Russian. It sounded angry. I startled. I flop on the ground like a fish trying to bury my weapon up to bear and turn to my right, and there is nothing there. Nothing at all. I freak out, wake up my butt buddy and told him he needed to take watch. It was only when I had started to calm down that I noticed I had pissed myself. A few weeks later, some translators talked to some locals in the area. Apparently there was a small Soviet op here as well during their time of war in Afghanistan. It had been overrun by the Mujahideen, and every single last one of them was slaughtered. The captured were executed, and they left the bodies to lay there. I'll say it once more before finishing this section. This is not the only story around about Observation Point Rock, and I encourage you to go and look into some more. It's strange how so many soldiers over the years have shared, and probably still to this day share, these paranormal encounters around the same place. It makes you sit back and think about war in general, and how many random military bodies over the whole of humanity have been buried in similar fashions to the Soviets, and how many unknown paranormal hotspots could have been created from them. We just happened to have found one in the middle of Afghanistan. Whether these encounters are caused by paranoia, word-of-mouth rumours, or the spirits of thousands of years of dead soldiers really do walk the sands at night, that's not for me to determine. But what is clear is something weird is definitely happening at night at Observation Point Rock.